Hello, this is Sharon Sarago, and this is going to be our first piece that we actually look at. And this is going to be James Madison's first inaugural address. Before we start this, I want you to know that if you haven't done it yet, I really want you to stop this video and go print out the article, the address, and read it a couple of times, and then work the questions about that passage. Because right now I'm going to explain the passage to you. I just want to be sure that you try to do it alone first before I tell you, what it really means. And also, be sure that you get your vocabulary study out too, because all of the words in that vocabulary study are words that Madison used in this inaugural address. And if you don't know what they are, then you can look them at the time. So if you need to pause, go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead, then you can come back and do this again. So here's the very beginning of it. Unwilling to depart from examples of the most revered authority, I avail myself of the occasion now presented to express the profound impression made on me by the call of my country to the station, to the duties of which I am about to pledge myself by the most solemn of sanctions. Now, clearly, this language is extremely difficult to understand. We just don't talk like this today. We're much more informal. This is very, very formal language, very formal structure. So let's see what he says. He's unwilling to depart from examples of the most revered authority. Well, our presidents are the most revered authorities. We hold them in very high esteem, and each time that we had a president, they give inaugural addresses. And this is what he's saying. I am not willing to depart from that pattern, from those examples of these previous presidents. So I avail myself of the occasion, and avail, it means that I take advantage of this occasion now presented to express the profound impression made on me by the call of my country to the station of the duties to which I am about to pledge myself. So he's taking the advantage of the occasion in this address to tell you, or to tell his people, how impressed he was, the profound impression made on him by the call of his country. That means that they nominated him, they voted for him, and he was elected president, and he's very, very impressed with that. And they knew that they were asking him to come and lead the country, so he would have duties. And he says, I am going to pledge myself to do the very best that I can in this job. He continues, so distinguished a mark of confidence proceeding from the deliberate and tranquil suffrage of a free and virtuous nation would, under any circumstances, have commanded my gratitude and devotion, as well as filled me with an awful sense of the trust to be assumed. So we say a mark of confidence coming from these people. And all of this information here, you'll notice that it has commas around it. It's just an extra bit of information. But his basic sentence says, such a distinguished mark of confidence would, under any circumstances, had commanded my gratitude and devotion. So he's saying the fact that they voted for him for president was a mark of confidence. It showed him they believe in him. And under any circumstances, that would have commanded his gratitude and his devotion. This little part right here, proceeding from the deliberate and tranquil suffrage, remember that the word suffrage means the right to vote. So he's saying that these people were not forced to vote for him. It wasn't a society where you had to be afraid of what you were going to do when you voted. They were free, and they are virtuous, and they are trustworthy and honest people. And it makes a big impression upon him. And then he says, it filled me with an awful sense of trust. This word awful today usually means bad. It was an awful movie. It was a bad movie. But that's not really what it means in this context. awful. That means awe. A-W-E, awe. He says he was filled with awe. And he was filled with a sense of the trust that he was going to assume. It filled me with an awful sense of the trust to be assumed. Under the various circumstances which give peculiar solemnity to the existing period, I feel that both the honor and the responsibility allotted to me are inexpressibly enhanced. Okay, so here he says, under these circumstances, right now, in this existing period, that because he was voted president at that period of time, he feels both honor and the responsibility allotted to me. This means the responsibility given to him by the fact that they voted for him for president. And it says it's inexpressibly enhanced. It just makes it so much stronger in his mind that they would vote for him at this time. Then, the present situation of the world is indeed without a parallel, and that of our own country full of difficulties. So clearly there were things that were going on at that time, and they thought that it had never been that way. Now, it says without parallel. And then he says the pressure of these two is more severely felt because they have fallen upon us at a moment when the national prosperity being at a height not before attained, the contrast resulting from the change that had been rendered the more striking. So they have difficulties of that time. He doesn't say right here what they are, but he says the pressure is felt even more severely because of the time. And look at this. He says the national prosperity being at a height not before attained. So apparently their economy had actually grown during this time. And there was such a contrast from where they had come from. He continues, under the benign influence of our republican institutions and the maintenance of peace with all nations, while so many of them were engaged in bloody and wasteful wars, the fruits of a just policy were enjoyed in an unrivaled growth of our faculties and resources. This word means benign. It means not harmful. Okay, you have malignant and benign. Benign is the one that's not harmful. So he says, under those particular influence of our institutions, they were not harmful. And the maintenance of peace, so benign, still perhaps meaning something peaceful. The maintenance of peace with all nations, while everyone else of them, so many of them were engaged in bloody and wasteful wars. The United States was not. And then he says, the fruits, the results of that, the fruits of a just policy were enjoyed in an unrivaled growth. And that means what he said up here. Never before have they felt this kind of prosperity, an unrivaled growth of our faculties and resources. Proofs of this were seen in the improvements of agriculture, in the successful enterprises of commerce, in the progress of manufacturers and useful arts, in the increase of the public revenue, and the use made of it in reducing the public debt, and in the valuable works and establishments everywhere multiplying over the face of our land. So here he's telling us about the unrivaled growth of the country. He said they had improvements of agriculture, they had successful enterprises in commerce, businesses grew, the progress of manufacturing grew, the increase of the public revenue, that's money. So the public money would be the government funds, and the use of it in reducing the public debt. So not only were they able to get more money, but they also made good use of it, and they reduced the public debt. And then in the valuable works and establishments everywhere, multiplying over the face of our land. So apparently everybody profited from their economy a few years previous. He says, it is a precious reflection that the transition from this prosperous condition of our country to the scene which has some time been distressing us is not chargeable on any unwarrantable views, nor, as I trust, on any involuntary errors in the public councils. So, a precious reflection, looking back at it, the transition from this prosperous condition of our country to the scene which has for some time been distressing us. So we'd have to look back at the history and see exactly what he was talking about. But he says it is not chargeable on any unwarrantable views, nor, as I trust, on any voluntary errors in the public council. Basically, not any one person was at fault. Indulging no passions which trespass on the rights or the repose of other nations, it has been the true glory of the United States to cultivate peace by observing justice, and to entitle themselves to the respect of the nations at war by fulfilling their neutral obligations with the most scrupulous impartiality. So he says, regardless of how passionate we might feel about it, how angry or how excitable, anything having to do with passions, they weren't indulging them. They didn't allow the passions to take over. So he says, indulging no passions which trespass on the rights or the repose of other nations, repose, the rest, okay, the peace perhaps. It has been the true glory of the United States to cultivate peace by observing justice, and to entitle themselves to the respect of the nations at war by fulfilling their neutral obligations. And so even if they have communications and perhaps commerce with other nations that are at war, they remain neutral. And they fulfill their neutral obligations with the most scrupulous impartiality. Scrupulous means extremely careful. And they're trying to be impartial so that they're not giving more attention or more favors to one than to another. They're being impartial. He continues, if there be candor in the world, that means frankness and truth, but mostly honesty, being very straightforward. If there be candor in the world, the truth of these assertions will not be questioned. So he's saying, if there is frankness in the world, nobody's going to say, well, I don't really believe what you're saying. The truth of these assertions, which he has said in this address, won't be questioned. And then he says, posterity at least will do justice to them. Posterity is, things that you leave behind, or the posterity, the future that comes in. I leave this to posterity. So you might say, well, I'm going to leave this to my children. That would be my posterity. So in this case, he's saying that future generations will look back and do justice to these concepts. And he continues on, the unexceptionable course could not avail against the injustice and violence of the belligerent powers. Belligerent means warlike. In their rage against each other, or impelled by more direct motives, principles of retaliation have been introduced equally contrary to universal reason and acknowledged law. So there are some of the countries, powers, that were very belligerent, wanting war, in their rage against each other, their hatefulness, or impelled by more direct motives. Perhaps one country had certain minerals, or perhaps oil even, and they wanted it. That's sort of what that means, impelled by more direct motives. Principles of retaliation have been introduced. So one country does one thing and then somebody else wants to get back at them. That's retaliation. They have been introduced equally and that means one country does it, then the other country does it. They're perhaps all guilty. And this is contrary to universal reason. It makes no sense. And acknowledged law. How long their arbitrary edicts, those are rules that they've just arbitrarily set up, how long their arbitrary edicts will be continued in spite of the demonstrations that not even a pretext for them has been given by the United States, and of the fair and liberal attempt to induce a revocation of them cannot be anticipated. Induce means to bring forward, to make, and a revocation comes from the word revoke. When you revoke something, you sort of undo it, like a law could be revoked. You would undo it. Unsuring myself that under every vicissitude the determined spirit and united counsels of the nation will be safeguards to its honor and its essential interest, I repair to the post assigned me with no other discouragement than what springs from my own inadequacy to its high duties. So he's saying that, assuring himself that under every concern that he has, the determined spirit and united counsels of the nation will be safeguards to its honor and its interest. And then he says, I repair to the post. So now he's saying, I am going to the office of presidency. I repair means go. I repair to the post assigned me, this is the presidency, with no other discouragement than what springs from my own inadequacy to its high duties. So he's saying that nobody else has discouraged him. Everybody has supported him and been very wonderful about it. It's only what's inside his own heart that he thinks, I may not be up to the task, because these are very, very high duties that they have trusted me with. And so he doesn't go with any discouragement other than what springs from his own heart, thinking about the inadequacies that he might have to the high duties of public office, of this particular public office. If I do not sink under the weight of this deep conviction, it is because I find some support in a consciousness of the purposes and a confidence in the principles which I bring with me into this arduous service. So, if I do not sink under the weight of this deep conviction, he knows the office is going to have many, many things that are going to be problematic. But he says he's going to find support in the awareness of the people's support of him, the confidence in the principles that he has learned through the country, his honesty, his truthfulness with y'all. And he says, these are the things that I'm bringing with me into this arduous service. Arduous means very, very difficult. So he's acknowledging the difficulties that he knows he's going to face in the office of presidency, but he also knows that he's got the support of the country, and that is what's going to bring him through it. So hopefully now you have a better understanding about what Madison was trying to say. And I want you to go back to your printed pages now and look at your questions again. So you might have gotten everything correct, and then there might be one or two of them that you'd like to change your answers. So you can read the passage again and again and again and see if you can get those answers right. And then when we get together on our meeting, we'll meet either Monday night at 7 or Saturday morning at 10 in the morning. Then we'll meet and we'll discuss this, and we'll talk about what you got out of it, what you saw, and we'll talk about those questions that you had. Just understand that you're going to have to get used to the language that they use in these documents, because remember that the College Board President has promised he's going to put a document from the Founding Fathers on every single test. So the language of them is hard, and so is the vocabulary, and thus we have study vocabulary. So just be sure that you get the vocabulary printed out and you study that also, because these words were very, very common at the time, and you're going to see them again and again and again. All right, so that's enough of this, and we'll go on with some other things that we have to do this week later.